My name is Bettejean Kramer. 3 months ago, my husband of 44 years died suddenly and unexpectedly. I was 1,000 miles away. I was in Iowa with my mother, who lives alone, is 88 years old. And I called my husband in the afternoon and again at night, and I couldn't get a hold of him. I was concerned, but he had always told me there's a logical explanation, so I prayed about it. I had a strong sense there is nothing you can do, and went to sleep. I had a sound and restful sleep, knowing that I would talk to him first thing in the morning. At 7:20 the next morning, I called, and when I couldn't get a hold of him, I called a friend and said, "Please check. I don't know what's going on with George." 10 minutes later, I knew that he was dead, and he had been gone for 16 hours. I was still in my nightgown, clinging to a lukewarm cup of instant coffee when I talked to the detective, to the funeral home, to the coroner, to my pastor, and called my 4 children. By 9:30 that night, I had arrived at home. The women in my community group were there, and my closest friends. They had brought flowers and soup and wine. They'd put a flag in the yard, and there were candles everywhere, and they made sure that I would not be alone until my son and his family arrived from Dallas that night. It was 2 a.m. before things settled down, and I fell into bed unbearably alone. I was exhausted, so I fell asleep for a few hours. When I woke up the next morning, the very first waking thought I had was, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. Nothing more, no comforting words, no promises, just that, and it was enough. At that moment, when the reality that the rest of my life was forever changed, that which I had counted on as being safe and dependable was gone, I chose to bow my knees to the Father. I would not be angry. I would not question. I would simply accept. And I have stayed in that place from that moment forward. It was almost as if every day I saw that there were 2 hands in front of me, and one held a cup of suffering, and the other held a bowl of blessings. And both of those were there every morning. But my choice was, which hand would I grab that day? What would I cling to and hang on to? And I was afraid that if I hung on to the cup of sorrow and sadness, that I would literally drown in my grief. And so every day I began to look for what are the blessings and let me focus on those. Every day I began to focus on gratitude, and then I did the most audacious thing I think that a woman in mourning has ever done. I began to post my blessings on Facebook. But I continued for 2 reasons. The first reason was purely selfish. I knew I couldn't travel this journey alone. I had to have an entourage of people who were willing to walk this way with me. As I posted, I began to get a response that I had not expected. People began to send me private Facebook messages saying the story of your grief is helping me process my own. And so the second reason I continued to post was because in my suffering, God was able to help other people. Some of my posts were very real, and I had to share. George was not always perfect, and I put on as I wrote about some of the things about him that drove me crazy, like his driving and his control of the remote. It brought laughter, but I discovered it was helping couples have conversations. In my pain, and because of it, I was helping others process their pain. And so I kept writing, and in the writing it really helped me come to terms with the reality of what I was feeling. People keep asking me, how are you doing? And I say, I'm hanging on. I know they are hoping for a more positive response, something that indicates process and progress. But when I say I'm hanging on, it means I am hanging on to everything I have come to know of God. It means that I am hanging on to every promise that He has made, to every blessing that He has given me. I'm hanging on to every person who is willing to have the patience with me in this process. I am hanging on to the fact that this brings Him glory, and I'm hanging on to the hope in a future that I cannot see. That if I were to sum it all up, I would say that I am hanging on because God is hanging on to me.